Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to another weekly reading wrap-up. If I look kind of shiny and red, it's because I've been outside planting garlic and picking peanuts and thought, oh yeah, I should probably film this video before the day is over. Because I've been very good at forgetting video stuff recently, which is why there wasn't a video this past week. I forgot to edit what I filmed. So I'm trying to reset on the video schedule this weekend and not doing a very good job at remembering to do that. Anyway, things I read this past week after that little tangent. I read 3 things, and one of them is a book that took me almost 2 years to read, which is very strange for me. I'm going to start off with the audiobook I listened to, and that is Unholy Land by Lavie Tidhar. I wish that I had read this in print. I feel like there are probably some textual clues and formatting that made it easier to tell when things were flashbacks or thoughts, just so I could keep things more straight in my head. The audiobook narrator actually did a really good job. I liked his voice, I liked the accents that he used and stuff, but there are just some stories and some writers where I feel like their style, their language works better when it's coming in through my eyeballs rather than through my ears, and Tidhar is probably one of those. Anyway, I think it's a little hard for me to explain what Unholy Land is about because I actually don't know that much about the real history of Palestine or Israel, and this story is all about alternate realities blending into each other, about how Israel was established and where it was established. The main character is a Jewish man who's been living in Germany. He writes pulp fiction. In a way, he's kind of an authorial insertion, including references to Tidhar's own work. And this man, he decides to travel back to Israel, or what he calls it, Palestina. He slips from one reality into another, and the Palestina that he ends up in was one established in Africa. And he's kind of fighting his memories of the one life and one reality versus the memories trying to assert themselves in this other reality. And he's being pursued by some people who think he is a key or a clue to the slippage between realities. So it's kind of twisty and self-referential in these kind of Easter egg ways. I thought that was really interesting. It's also incredibly noir, very pulpy, very noir. This man, Tirosh, actually starts behaving as if he is one of those like noir detectives in one of his own novels, even though he's not actually a detective. So there were lots of little things like that that I thought were cool, that I really do appreciate about Tidhar's style. But I got to the end of the book and wondered what the point was. And that's where I thought maybe somebody who knows more about Jewish history, the history of Israel, might kind of identify the points of the story that they were talking about that I didn't really get. Apparently Tidhar was inspired to write the story when he found out that there was an actual expedition to Africa to determine if they could establish Israel there. They came back with a negative result, but there's that what if question. What if that had really happened? What if Israel had really been established in Africa and the Holocaust hadn't happened? How would that have changed things? I think that is a really interesting idea. I just don't think I had enough knowledge to appreciate the finer points of it. So I got to the end of it and I thought it was kind of sad and poignant, but didn't really know what the point of the characters' story arcs ultimately was. So it was okay. I also finished this beast of a book, Green Earth by Kim Stanley Robinson. This is an 1,100-page novel, and it is the condensed, updated, and revised version of Robinson's Science in the Capital trilogy that was published in the early aughts. So he basically came back a decade later and revised it and made it a single novel. Same story, but different, I assume. I haven't read the original trilogy. I read the first 500 pages of this a year and a half ago, and then put it down in the middle of a chapter and didn't come back to it for a very long time. And this past week I sat myself down and read the last 400 or 500 pages. It was a slog. I remembered loving the first half of this, but when I came back to it, it was incredibly boring for hundreds of pages. So I have very split feelings about the book. I'm not going to try to recap the whole plot because there is so much going on in this, and I think that's part of its problem. But I think the main question, the premise that the story wants to explore, wants to follow, is could you combat climate change with science-based policies at the federal government level in the United States? Which I should have found most of this to be very interesting. Optimistic climate change science fiction is right up my alley, but there was something in the execution of this that made it fail completely. I think its first problem is that while it has such an interesting main plot, that main plot is maybe only directly addressed in about 200 pages of this thing, and the other 900 pages are devoted to very rambling, tangential character story arcs and background information that, yeah, it all kind of weaves together because these are all characters who are the movers and shakers and influencers and politicians doing something about climate change, but a lot of it just felt like filler, and some of it I was completely uninterested in. So it wasn't focused enough on the main plot. It's too wordy, too much going on. The second thing is that the characters are really, really one-dimensional. I don't know why that didn't bother me in the first half. I think I noticed it more in the second half because it became very focused on a character named Frank. Like I feel like the first third was mainly about Charlie, who is working for a presidential candidate, and then the last 2/3 are very much about Frank, who is like a scientist researcher from UCLA on loan to the NSF in DC, and he opts to stay for another year working at the NSF to help with their radical plans for trying to fund climate change research and experimentation and stuff. And okay, this is where I might start going into a bit of a rant. Frank is a paleo bro. He is like, his whole character just aches of middle-aged, privileged, educated, white dude going through a midlife crisis, including romantic entanglements with 3 different women, including one that's insta-love with a spook from a black agency in the government. Then there's the whole thing with the refugee Buddhist monks and their commune and the Panchen Lama, and at some point early on in the story, Frank decides to live a parcellated lifestyle. He has a parcellated home, which that means he's homeless. He chooses to be homeless. He's living in a treehouse in a park in Washington, D.C., hanging out with the frisbee golf guys and the homeless people. And there was this point in the book where I just started mentally screaming at this character, why don't you just put the brakes on all of your relationship drama and get your brain damage figured out? Take care of yourself and just, it's so frustrating. And I'm not shading the character. He literally, truly has brain damage. He suffers a terrible nose injury and a concussion, and he walks around for almost a year knowing that he probably has brain damage that's affecting his decision-making ability. And yeah, like, what kind of person takes a year to get their brain injury diagnosed? Like, that can kill you. Oh my god. And that's barely scratching the surface with the stuff thrown into this book, but I pretty much gave up on caring about Frank because he's a paleo bro, and I did not find much of that interesting. Oh, and he's obsessed with Emerson of the Day quotes, and he goes around, like, he's dispersing Emerson and Thoreau quotes and winter weather gear to homeless people at a certain point. I'm like, there are very different socioeconomic and privilege statuses in conflict here, and you're quoting Emerson. Anyway, it wasn't all bad. I ended up rating this 3 out of 5 stars. I found it very difficult to sum up my feelings about this because I do remember loving the first half, and that's in stark contrast to how bored I was by the second half. And there isn't any like big shift in the middle or anything, so I don't know. Anyway, I'll stop talking about this book. Not bad. Definitely give it a try if you really want optimistic science fiction, because it is truly optimistic in a way that is very obvious compared to today's political climate in the US, but not maybe something I would recommend starting with if you've never read Robinson before. And then I read this little novella, This Is How You Lose the Time More, by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. I was very eagerly looking forward to this. I've heard great things about it. I've really enjoyed poetry by El-Mohtar in the past, and I've really enjoyed some of Max Gladstone's fantasy novels. And it just tickles me so much that these two are really good friends and they wrote a story together. So I'm a little disappointed to say that I did not enjoy this as much as I wanted to. I heard such great things about it from friends and such. Then I started reading it. I thought initially that the writing was beautiful. It reads like poetry. But then I got further into it and the prose started purpling. It seemed over the top, too much. Too much style over substance. There isn't enough of a plot, of a concrete story going on here. I think it lacks specifics of the world building, of context. It's so laser focused on the feelings of the two main characters. This is a time travel romance story between two agents on either side of a time war. They are locked in vicious combat with each other. These are two very deadly people. And they start writing letters and come to know each other and fall in love and don't want this good thing to be broken up by their sides finding out that they are fraternizing with the enemy, basically. But there is so little context for the war, for where these people come from, what their lives are like. It was so abstract that it started to lose me. I need a bit more solidity, reality, I guess. But there were parts of it, even when I was getting a bit tired of the lushness of the prose, that something would jump out at me. I thought that was beautiful. If this was like a short epic poem, maybe it would be even better. So yeah, I think that some people may bounce off of the writing really hard, and then some people will find it just to be the most absolutely beautiful thing they've read all year. I somehow land in the middle, which is an uncomfortable position. It's much easier to love something or to outright hate it. And when you just fall somewhere in the middle, you can see that glimmer of what works, and yet it doesn't fully come alive for you. That's the most frustrating thing when you're reading a book. So maybe I read it in the wrong frame of mind. Maybe I should have read it more slowly to really more absorb it like poetry in a way, but I did not. So maybe someday I will come back to it and it'll be a completely different experience. And that is it for this week. My reading had a definite bottleneck because of Green Earth this week, but I'm so glad I finally got that off of my TBR shelf. It's over with. It always seems like it's the humongous tomes of books that sit around unread for the longest amount of time, so it's quite an achievement when you check that one off. So I'm going to go off and do the rest of my day filming other things. Let me know if you have read any of these books. Leave me a comment down below. What did you think of these? Thank you so much for watching as always, and until next time, bye.